It's the Lekker Rugby Pod, only on Megaphone Rugby.
I want to talk to you about our new worst enemies or arch enemies, Ireland. And
Ireland.
you remember that day when you were driving back from Durban and we potted, and you were sitting there in the filling station on the side of the road. I mean, you were so dejected, and so was I. I mean, it was a terrible day. And ever since we know who the Irish are, we know who the players of Leinster are. I mean, we beat them at Loftus. The Bulls beat Leinster at Loftus. Why couldn't the Springboks beat them at Durban? So tell me about Ireland. What can we expect, Harry? And what are we looking forward to? I saw Ireland. Marie Kinsella said Ireland are the odds-on favourites. France is way behind them in second place. But are they really the favourites? Can we expect them to be beaten? I hope they get beaten, but yeah.
Well, Ireland's the favourites on the simple fact that their match with the French is in Dublin. So if the match was in Paris, I think you'd see that it would be the other way, probably. There's three factors that make that overrated, or three things that might make that look like a bad estimation by the bookies. One is you have a new coach, and it doesn't matter how much you say, but Simon Easterby was Andy Farrell's man. He's been walking with him. There is a huge difference from coach to coach, more so than the cost of characters of players. You can go from Alistair Coetzee or Hanneke Meyer to Rassie Erasmus and Jacques Nienaber with a similar core of players from all the way from 15 to now, and there's a different result. It does matter at CEO level, at navigator, head coach level. There is an amazing amount of man management, when to kick a chair, when to be soft, when to be kind, when to instruct. You can see that the same coaches win no matter where they go with weaker or strong players. So I think there is that factor of what if Ireland loses to England on weekend one? What happens? What happens to the fragile, morale and swagger? Second is that you have some of these rule changes that I think not really changes, but emphases. So referees are calling blocking, obstruction, and patterns in midfield more. And Ireland has depended on decoy runners now for a long time. So you don't know who you're tackling. They run at you with a diamond-shaped pod. Everyone looks like a carrier and everyone looks like a receiver. So James Ryan sells it. Ty Furlong has sold that move. So you just face people running at you at speed. There's a lot of that looks like blocking and obstruction, depending on where the ball goes. So referees have shown that could be happening. And the third thing I would say is it's just hard in life to go three-peat. And there's a reason why it's has it ever been done, Hugh? I mean, it's difficult because the people study you and you get everyone's best game.
Yeah, the only stat you need to know about Ireland this year is no team has ever won the Six Nations 3 years in a row. And these stats carry weight. They exist for a reason. No team has ever won back-to-back Grand Slams. Ireland's last season were on for a Grand Slam, went to Twickenham, or sorry, the Allianz Stadium, and everyone said that they were favourites, and they lost the game, and the Grand Slam was gone. These historical stats in the Six Nations is a historical tournament, and the historical stats tend to survive. So it would literally be unprecedented for Ireland to win it this season. And I completely agree with you, Harry. The thing about the coach changing, so at the top level, small changes like that can make a big deal. And there's an underlying current of discontent in Ireland, in Irish rugby at the moment. And if they do, for example, lose that first home game to England, the vibes will turn bad very badly. And maybe slightly unjustifiably when you look at some of the bad vibes in some of the other countries that we'll talk about a bit later. But there's the over-reliance on Leinster, the inability to bring in new talents, the dad's army, the old guard that they're still relying on, and the lack of evolution in attack. The way that the trend in rugby is going at the moment is less about phase on phase on phase on phase attack and more about first phase, more about starter plays, more about striking fast and quick. Ireland's attack was built on multi-phase, very attractive, very grinding you down rather than cutting you with a knife style attack, and rugby's moving away from that. So
Also, they cannot run away from you. Is I mean, obviously Keenan's quick, but their wings cannot do what the French wings can do. If you give Louis Bielbiere a sniff, he's gone. He is he's Cheslin Colby quick, and you saw what Cheslin Colby did to Damien Penault in the quarterfinal. So I don't think Ireland has looked a bit slow on the go. I think the other thing is they have Crowley, Prendergast, and Frawley. Frawley, the guy who killed us in Durban MVA, he's not even in the conversation for starting. And the problem with if you lose one to England, of all people, of all teams, and then you pin it on the Leinster guy or the Munster guy, everything in Ireland kicks off. It's like a Munster fire pit. It's going to be flames because they're going to blame each other. I told you that he didn't have this, the ability to go toe to toe. He's too slender. He's not robust enough. It should have been Jack. And then if it's the other way around, it's like, well, look, Sam would have made that kick. And so I do think there's a potential here. And I think you're right. There's a seething undercurrent in Ireland of why didn't we change enough? In the autumn, you saw it, come to bear in the All Blacks game. Have we kept going? Why are we bringing Cian Healy and Peter O'Mahony and Ian Henderson as our bomb squad? How does that compare to the youth and the speed that other teams are doing? So, MV, I think Ireland's in a bit of a pressurized situation as well, not from a coach standpoint, because Andy Farrell's, on sabbatical, but more, the idea of did we peak too soon? Did we keep missing our cycle? Did we bring in a guy like Tom Ahern? Did we have Nick Timoney? Why are we not using some of our dynamic guys and we keep throwing Peter O'Mahony in the mix?
I want to ask you this, and I'm not that familiar with the players, but what I am familiar with is Jock Nienaber. No, and he's not with Ireland, he's with Leinster. And the question I'm asking is, Leinster is shooting the lights out. I mean, they haven't lost a game this season so far. How much of that defensive structure do you think is going to be carried over to the Ireland team with the new coaches and everything? Is that going to be a real threat to us longer term as well? Is Jock going to be, sort of the Trojan horse almost?
I think the Nienaber defense, which is the 3B defense, it blitzes, which means that you take someone out of the line and you don't have connection. The holy grail of most defensive coaches is you must be able to, with one step, left or right, touch your teammate. Nienaber says, I want Peter Steph Toy, I want Jesse Creel, I want KLA venturing way beyond enemy lines, Faf de Klerk running behind the 10. Just disruption. Everywhere you just see green in a way. So that's the blitz. And he's taught that to Leinster, and they're using it at a club level. It's so disturbing to opponents that they just cannot seem to score against Leinster very easily. So the first B is the blitz. The second one is the barge, which is on most rucks, but also chosen rucks, to barge that ruck, not to pilfer it, not to jackal it, not even to commit people to, deck play on the ground, but to make everything rough and messy and move the point of the breakdown backward and sometimes get an arm or a leg in the way of the 9 and just kind of make everything bruising and tough. And the final one is big hits. So it's not so much that you miss tackle percentage is a key. It's that at some point in time, the Sio Kolisi or the Gary Ringrose just rattles you, just breaks your ribs, and feed off of that. So then defense becomes attack. So he's come to Ireland and done that. And so guys like James Ryan are enjoying defense now and finding their inner animal. I don't think that it's still personnel driven. So at test level, there's just people who can do, there's attributes, can you find a Cheslin Colby? Find me one. Go look all around Ireland and find me a Colby. So you won't. And if Colby said tomorrow, I want to be Irish, boom, he'd be in the test team, right? So there's just an ability to do things. That's why Jacques Nienaber even has the system, is because he was coaching people who have double involvement plays. They can make a tackle and be at the other place to get a tackle. I mean, that just becomes pure athleticism. Mapimpi has no lactic acid, so he could just keep running and running and running and running. You saw him with his shirt ripped off. The guy has zero body fat. So you have those things. I don't think Nienaber can make that happen in Ireland, but at a club level, he can make them the best defensive club in the world.
I hear what you're saying, Harry, but I mean, most of Ireland is Leinster. So how are they going to adapt to playing a Jock Nienaber kind of defensive system, and now move over to Ireland, and I have to go back to the old school or old style, or maybe a different style? How's that going to work? I mean, that's going to be a disconnect, isn't it?
I've joked that at some point in the Six Nations, the Ireland players are going to go, and where's Archia coming?
Yeah.
When's Jordy Barrett coming on? Jordy Barrett is such a good ruck player in the backfield. He's like a lock. He's the size of a lock from 1995 backward. He would be a lock. And then you have Archie Snyman, who's like a playmaking. He's unusual. He's a playmaking, offloading, Sonny Bill Williams, but he's 6'10". So you do have these things where you wonder in Ireland, have they become reliant on that? And specifically on the defense, I don't know to what extent you can take exactly the same thing. It's not like Jacques Nienaber doesn't sit down with the Irish national team and unload all of his IP. But you could have a smart guy like James Ryan, good schoolboy, sit down with them and say, I'm going to retro engineer it for you. And I think that's one of the fascinating things about the Six Nations and why people should watch, is because if you just take a thing like that and say, let me try to find the Nienaber in the Irish defense, that's interesting.
I think there's enough change in personnel in the Islands backline specifically to mean that you can't implement it that quickly. You have to remember that because of Andy Farrell being away with the Lions, this is kind of a pause year for Ireland. Yes, I'm sure they'll say, "Oh, we're carrying on as normal," but they don't have all the people there. That it's not the full focus of all the people who are going to be there. So it is going to be a bit of a slow year for Ireland in terms of progression. And you're going to have, if Jack Crowley is playing 10, Bundy Aki's at 12, maybe Mac Hansen on the wing, that's enough non-Nienaber coached players to make a big difference. And let's not undersell how big of an impact Geordie Barrett has been to Leinster. He's been absolutely incredible since he's gone there, and Ireland don't have that. Now, the good news is that the centres that they do have are still pretty darn good, but I think it's different enough, and it's learned enough from all the years pre-Nienaber that it will be okay. But it would be funny if in one scenario we suddenly see Bundy Aki's doing one defensive system and Gary Ringrose outside him shoots out like a crazy person, and they would both look at each other like, why didn't you do what I did?
That is exactly the issue with the Nienaber defense. So everyone knows what to do to blitz. You can watch Gary Ringrose now and you say, okay, so he's doing what Jesse Creel does. It's the non-blitzers and what they do. What does Dialende do the minute that Creel blitzes is he starts sprinting to touch. And everyone knows they put their head down and just sprint. So you sometimes see weird things like Pollard out there that touch. You see Allende, you see the 10 and the 11 and the 12 from the other side getting all the way across. It's an incredibly physically demanding defense. So at test level, if Gary Ringrose shoots out and Aki and Crowley don't know what's going on, you're going to have holes everywhere, and it looks terrible. And it's what happened to England, just shipping points, like crazy, giving up 42 to Australia because they were in this hybrid kind of defense. And Warwick doesn't understand the blitz defense. He thinks it's line speed. He doesn't know that you specifically need to disconnect for the Felix to have worked. And so they always had this kind of debate about that. And I think in the end, Borthwick is going to have his way, which is we're not going to play a true blitz defense anymore.
Right, I want to ask you this question. I've been watching Sam Prendergast now, and I mean, to me, he's the most ungainly flyer I've ever seen. And you mentioned Frawley there that broke our odds here, and Jack Crowley. Just tell me a bit about that. Those three fly-offs, fly-offs at pivotal position. How does that work? How does that, what do you see the Ireland number 10 going forward? Who do you see it as?
So I don't think Frawley is in the conversation at the moment. He's not been getting regular game time for Leinster. In fact, it's funny, last year I can show you a video on my channel where we talked about, does Frawley need to move to Munster to develop his game because he's not getting into the Leinster team? I think for me at the moment, Crowley is still number one. I think if you talk about ceilings of players, how close is Jack Crowley to his ceiling compared to how close Sam Prendergast is to his ceiling? I think Sam Prendergast is further away. So I think it could go on to be that Prendergast ends up being the guy long term. But I think today Crowley has the head start on him. And I think that Crowley's tackling and defense is better. Sam Prendergast all told, isn't that into tackling. It's not what he was born to do. And he is gangly. Some say that he does need to bulk up a little bit. But I spoke to a guy who used to coach in Leinster Schools, Leinster Academy, and he said that from the first training session that Sen Prendergast attended at under 18s level, he had people from the higher ups going, tell us about this kid. So he is very much the chosen one. And you could get into all the conspiracy theories now about Leinster versus Munster. One's a Leinster man, one's a Munster man. So the chosen one being from Leinster, the narrative writes itself. But for me, if Ireland were playing in a World Cup, I was going to say final, quarterfinal tomorrow, Jack Crowley starts, in my opinion.
That's true. That's got to be true. I think people are attracted to Sam's X factor, his ability to run the Sexton loop, his flat out speed. You remember that offload break that Archie did in the middle of the field, and then he fed it to Sam. Sam streaked away from wingers and fullbacks. There was no one touching him, and
it was against Bristol, though. To be fair.
But I mean, there's some speed is speed, right? So you look at anyone who can run away from wings if you're a 10. So then you go, okay, but what if there's maybe a better kicker, pressure kicker? I'm not sure that's true either. So that you have a true, like, proper kicking 10s. They're both very good at that. I would go with the robustness of Crowley in the Six Nations tournament. I just think he can take a hit. He can run over his opposition. He could take on Marcus Smith and he could run through Marcus. I don't think Sam's running through anybody. He has to run around them and beyond them. And that's not really possible against, say, a French Sean Edwards team. There's not going to be that much space that you see against Bristol.
It's the Lekker Rugby Pod, only on Megaphone Rugby.